September 11th was just like any other day for the most powerful man in the world, the US president. About 1,000 miles away from Washington, D.C., in a school in Florida, US President George W. Bush's Graham was running. The conversation between Bush and the students was going on. The chief of the White House whispered something in President Bush's ear, and the color of President Bush's face faded a little. But soon he normalizes himself and everything starts running at the same speed as before. Conversations with the students start in the class. After some time, Andrew Card again entered the class, hiding his anxiety on his face. This time he spoke 11 words in Bush's ear. President Bush is shocked and panicked after hearing the card, but remains calm. You must be wondering what Andrew Card said in his ear. So let me tell you that Andrew had told President Bush about the attack on America, which is known as the 9/11 attack. Yes, friends, it was a terrorist attack on the most powerful country in the world. In this video, we are going to talk about the 9/11 attack. We will know how this attack was carried out, what was the planning behind it and who was behind this attack, as well as discuss the effects it had on the whole world including the United States. Right now only 3% of people subscribe to our channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, then subscribe quickly and become a part of our YouTube family. So moving towards 9/11, what happened on September 11th? Due to which the entire world including America was shaken. September 11th, or 9/11, is the name given to 4 coordinated Islamic suicide terrorist attacks by Al-Qaeda on the United States. On the morning of September the 11th, 2001, 19 hijackers hijacked commercial airliners bound for the United States. The first 2 planes crashed into New York City's Twin Towers, the world's 5 tallest towers at the time, and the next 2 flew to targets in and around Washington, the nation's capital. The third team attacked the United States military base in Arlington County, Virginia, the Pentagon, and a 4th plane crashed during a passenger rebellion in rural Pennsylvania. The attacks on September the 11th killed 2. 17 minutes later, on September 11, 2001, United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center at 9:03 in the morning. The 2 110-story towers collapsed in less than an hour, resulting in the destruction of the other 5 structures in the World Trade Center complex and the damaging or destruction of nearby buildings. At 9:37 in the morning, a 3rd flight, American Airlines Flight 77, crashed into the Pentagon, resulting in a partial collapse. At 10:03 in the afternoon, the 4th and final flight, United Airlines Flight 93, flew toward the U.S. Capitol and the White House. The passengers, alerted to the earlier attacks, fought for control and forced the hijackers to nosedive the plane into a field near Shanksville at 10:03. When the United States invoked Article 5 of its NATO treaty, its only use to date, it called on allies to stand with Al-Qaeda in its fight against the spread of terrorism. As the United States and NATO invaded Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda's leader, Osama bin Laden, fled the country by hiding in the White Mountains, denying any involvement in the attacks. In 2004, Al-Qaeda released a tape of a recorded statement in which it claimed responsibility for the September 11th attacks. The group's stated reasons for doing so included American support for Israel, the United States' presence in Saudi Arabia, and sanctions imposed against Iraq. After a nearly 10-year manhunt, bin Laden was killed in a U.S. military raid on May 22, 2011, after being found in his compound in the Pakistani city of Abbottabad. The war in Afghanistan lasted for 8 more years until February 2020, when American and NATO forces agreed to pull out of the country. The last American troops left the country on the August 30, 2021. The following day saw the return of the Taliban to power. Ayman al-Zawahiri, another mastermind behind the attacks who took over from bin Laden as Al-Qaeda's leader, was killed in a U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan on July 31, 2022. In addition to the hijackers who carried out the attacks, 977 people were killed, and thousands more were injured in the aftermath of the attacks. The attacks also caused significant long-term damage to infrastructure and property, and caused an estimated $10 billion of damage. The attacks also caused significant economic damage to the United States and caused a global market shock. Many countries tightened anti-terrorism laws and increased the powers of police and intelligence agencies in response to the attacks. The cleanup of the site at World Trade Center, known as Ground Zero, took 8 months, and it was finished in May 2002. The site at the other site, the Pentagon, was repaired within 1 year. Flight 11 remains the most deadly terrorist attack in the history of the United States, killing 343 people and 72 members of the fire service. The death toll was second only to that of Flight 175. After several delays in the construction of a new tower, work on One World Trade Center started in November 2006 and was completed in November 2014. Other memorials to the September 11th attacks include New York City's National September 11th Memorial and Museum, Arlington County, Virginia's The Pentagon Memorial, and the Pennsylvania crash site's Flight 93 National Memorial. Background: Al-Qaeda. The roots of Al-Qaeda can be traced back to 1979 with the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. In the wake of the invasion, Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden went to Afghanistan to help organize the Arab Mujahideen, the Afghan Arabs, to resist the communist invaders, the Soviets, until they left in 1989. In 1984, Al-Qaeda co-founder Abdullah al-Azzam, along with Al-Qaeda Fatwa leader Omar al-Sheikh, established the Al-Qaeda Mujahideen (MK) to support the Arab Mujahideen who had joined the jihadi movement in Afghanistan. The United States CIA funneled several billions of dollars in weapons to the native Mujahideen resistance, some of which went to Arab volunteers. No direct evidence of U.S. aid to Al-Qaeda or any of its affiliates was ever found. In 1996, Al-Qaeda issued its first fatwa in which it declared war on the United States, calling for the removal of all American troops from the Arabian Peninsula. In a second fatwa in 1998, bin Laden laid out his objections to U.S. foreign policy in relation to the State of Israel and the continued. Bin Laden said that Muslims must attack U.S. targets until the U.S. stopped its aggressive policies against Muslims. Bin Laden said that throughout Islamic history, jurists have agreed that the jihad is an individual obligation if the U.S. destroys Muslim countries. Bin Laden's Hamburg cell included Islamists who would become key 9/11 hijackers. Members of the Hamburg cell included Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Hay, Zia al-Hadra, Ramzi bin al-Khwarizmi, and Said al-Bayhaji. Bin Laden claimed that all Muslims should wage a war against the U.S. and fight against U.S. aggression. He said that military strikes on U.S. assets would be a message to Americans, trying to force them to reconsider their support for Israel and other aggressive U.S. policies. In a 1998 conversation with John Miller, bin Laden said, "We say to the people of the United States, and we say to the mothers of the soldiers and to the mothers of Americans in general, that if you value your life and the life of your children, you will seek a nationalist government that will serve your interests and not those of the Jewish people. If tyranny continues, the fight will come to America. Just as you and the 1993 World Trade Center bomber, Ramzi Youssef, did. That is my message for the American people. Seek a serious government that serves your interests and will not assault others, their countries, or their honor. My message for American journalists is this: ask not why we did what we did but what their government did that made us defend ourselves." Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden was responsible for the attacks of September 11, 2001. Initially, he denied involvement in the attacks, but later reversed his denial in an Al Jazeera interview on September 16. He said, "I did not carry out this act. It appears that it was carried out by people with their own motivations." In November 2001, a videotape of bin Laden speaking to Khalid al-Harbi was recovered by U.S. forces from a demolished house in Afghanistan. In it, bin Laden acknowledged that he had been aware of the attacks in advance. In a second video, released on December 27, he said, "It has become evident that the West and America in general have an unutterable hatred for Islam, and that hatred is directed against America. The terrorism against America is to be commended because it is a reaction to injustice, and it is to force America to cease its support of Israel, which is killing our people. We declare that the United States will come to an end whether bin Laden and his followers live or die. It is essential to strike at the United States economy, which is the foundation of its military strength. If the economy is damaged, the US will be forced to re-enter the region. In a tape-recorded statement, Osama bin Laden acknowledged that Al-Qaeda was responsible for the attacks. He said that the attacks were done because of the 1982 US-led invasion of Lebanon by the Israelis. The bombardment began, and many people were killed, injured, and terrorized. I could not forget the images, the blood, the severed limbs, the women and children lying everywhere. As I watched the towers of Lebanon fall, along with the lives of the people who lived in them, as the high-rises crumbled around them, as the rockets rained down on our homes with no mercy, I thought that we should strike back at the oppressor. And that we would destroy the towers of America so that he would taste what we had tasted, and so that he would not kill our women, our children, and our freedom. That day, it became clear to me that this oppression, this deliberate killing of innocent people, is a deliberate policy of the United States. Destruction is liberty and democracy. Resistance is terrorism and hatred. He personally led his followers to carry out the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. In a video obtained by Al Jazeera in September 2006, bin Laden was seen in the company of one of the masterminds of the attacks, Ramzi bin Laden, the other mastermind of the attacks, Hamza bin al-Hassani, and hijackers Hamza al-Ghadi and Walid Rabbani. He was on the FBI's most wanted list since 1998 for his role in the 1998 bombing of U.S. College Sheikh Mohammed and other Al-Qaeda members. In April 2002, Al-Qaeda member Khalid Sheikh Mohammed admitted to being involved in the attacks. According to the Al Jazeera Arabic television channel, Fouda, bin Laden, Gaddafi, Ramzi, Abu Turab, and Atef all had full knowledge of the operation. The 9/11 Commission's 2004 report found that Mohammed's hatred of the U.S., the primary architect of the attacks, was rooted in a violent disagreement with U.S. foreign policy towards Israel. Mohammed was also an advisor and financial backer of the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, and was the uncle of one of the bombers. At the end of 1994, he worked with Youssef on the planning of a new terror attack, which was to take place in January 1995. The Bojinka plot failed and ISAF was captured by U.S. troops the following month. This plot would have a major impact on the later attacks on September 11, 2001. Motives. According to investigators, Osama bin Laden's call for a holy war against the U.S., as well as a fatwa he and others signed in 1998 calling for the death of Americans, are seen as proof of his motive. In a November 2001 interview with Al-Qaeda leader Hamid Mir, bin Laden described the attacks on September 11 as revenge for U.S. atrocities against Muslims around the world. Bin Laden also claimed that the attacks did not target women or children, and that the targets were American symbols of economic and military power. In his November 2002 letter to the Americans, bin Laden explicitly outlined Al-Qaeda's reasons for the attacks. U.S. support of Israel. Bin Laden's strategy to support and globally expand the Al-Aqsa Intifada. Attacks against Muslims by U.S.-led coalition in Somalia. U.S. support of the government of Philippines against Muslims in the Moro conflict. U.S. support for the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. U.S. support of Russian atrocities against Muslims in Chechnya. Pro-American governments in the Middle East, who act as your agents, being against Muslim interests. U.S. support of Indian oppression against Muslims in Kashmir. The presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. The sanctions against Iraq. Environmental destruction. In the aftermath of the attacks, Al-Qaeda leaders such as Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri issued additional videos and audio recordings in which they repeated the reasoning behind the attacks. Among the publications related to the attacks were Al-Qaeda leader Syed Omar bin Laden's 2002 Letters to the American People and a 2004 video by Al-Qaeda leader Nasser al-Khwarizmi. Bin Laden believed non-Muslims should not have a permanent presence on Saudi Arabia's Arabian Peninsula. In 1996, he issued a fatwa calling on Saudi Arabia to expel American troops from the country. In 1998 he wrote in the journal Al-Qaeda, "For more than 7 years, the US has been invading Islam's lands in the most holy places in the Arabian Peninsula, looting its wealth, ordering its rulers to do as they please, oppressing its citizens, terrorizing its neighbors and using its bases on the peninsula as a spearhead to attack the neighboring Muslim nations." In an interview with CNN in December 1999, bin Laden said that he believed Americans were too close to Mecca and that this was a provocation for the whole Muslim world. In a fatwa issued in 1998, Al-Qaeda cited the Iraq sanctions as justification for killing Americans, citing the protracted blockade, among other acts that constituted a declaration of war on Allah, His Messenger, and Muslims. According to the fatwa, killing Americans and their allies, including civilians and military personnel, was an individual obligation for every Muslim who could do so in any country where it was possible to do so. The fatwa also stated that Muslims should kill Americans in order to free the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Holy Mosque of Mecca from their control, and to remove the Americans, forces from all lands of Islam, so that they would be defeated and no longer be able to threaten any Muslims. In a 2004 interview, bin Laden said that he first thought of destroying the towers in 1982 when he saw Israel bombing high-rise apartment blocks in Lebanon during the 1982 war. According to some analysts, including John Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt, and others, the attacks were motivated by U.S. support of Israel. Bin Laden again linked the attacks on September 11, 2001, to U.S. support of Israel in 2004 and 2010, though most of the letters were about bin Laden's contempt for President Bush and his desire to destroy and bankrupt the United States. In addition to bin Laden's and Al-Qaeda's motivations, some authors have suggested the humiliation caused by the Islamic world's failure to keep up with the West and globalization, as well as a desire to push the U.S. into a wider war against the Muslim world in order to encourage more allies to join Al-Qaeda. Others have argued that the attacks on America were a strategic ploy to provoke America into war that would spark a global Islamic revolution. The documents seized in the 2011 operation included several notes that bin Laden wrote in September 2002 under the heading, "The Birth of the Idea of September 11th." In these notes, bin Laden talks about how he was motivated to carry out 9/11. He talks about how he got the idea for 9/11 from the crash of the Egyptair Flight 990 on the October 31, 1999. The flight was intentionally blown out of the sky by one of its co-pilots, Gamil al-Batouti. "That's how the concept for 9/11 came to my mind, and that's when we started planning it," he says, adding that at the time, no one knew about 9/11 but al-Batouti, al-Hafsa, and al-Khashoggi. According to the 9/11 Commission report, al-Bashir was the architect of the attacks, but he isn't named in bin Laden's notes. Timing. In 1996, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed first proposed the attacks to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden had just returned to Afghanistan from Sudan and was in a state of flux with Al-Qaeda. The attacks on the African embassy in 1998 and bin Laden's fatwa in February 1998 marked a major turning point in Al-Qaeda's operations, as he became determined to attack the United States. At the end of 1998 or beginning of 1999, bin Laden authorized Mohammed to proceed with the planning of the plot. In early 1999, Mohammed, bin Laden and Al-Qaeda's deputy Mohammed Atef held several meetings. Atef provided logistical support, including target selection and travel arrangements for the hijackers, while bin Laden provided leadership, financial support, and was involved in the selection of participants. He initially chose Nawaf al-Hazmi, a young jihadist with experience fighting in Bosnia, who arrived in the U.S. mid-January 2000. At the end of 1999, a group from Hamburg, Germany arrived in Afghanistan with the intention of becoming second-in-command to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. This group included Hazmi, Marwan, Ziad, and Ramzi, all of whom were chosen for their education, English proficiency, and prior experience in the West. New recruits were usually screened for special skills. And it was discovered by Al-Qaeda leaders that Hanjour had already obtained his commercial pilot's license, which allowed him to blend in with the locals by ordering food in restaurants and wearing Western clothing. On December 8, 2000, Hanjour joined Hazmi in San Diego, where they soon left for Arizona for refresher training. Marwan arrived in late May 2000, followed by Atta on June 3 and Jera on June 27. Many people have speculated that the hijackers chose 9/11 as the attack date because it was similar to the phone number that would be used to report an emergency in the US. The hijackers applied for a visa several times to enter the United States as a Yemeni citizen, but were turned down due to concerns that they would overstay their visa. Instead, they stayed in Hamburg and provided coordination between Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda leader Mohammed. The three members of the Hamburg cell were all pilot trainees at South Florida's Huffman Aviation in the spring. In the summer of 2001, Al-Qaeda's second-in-command, Atta, met with Al-Qaeda leader Syed Omar al-Zawahiri in Catalonia, Spain in July 2001 to coordinate the plot's details, including the final target selection, and to relay bin Laden's wishes that the attacks be carried out quickly. Several hijackers obtained passports from crooked Saudi officials, either as family members or through fraudulent passports. However, according to Lawrence Wright, the hijackers chose September 11 because it was the day John III Sobieska, the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, started the battle that defeated the Muslim armies of the Ottoman Empire that were trying to occupy Vienna, now the capital of Austria. Vienna was the capital of both the Holy Roman Empire, and the Habsburg monarchy, the House of Habsburg, in the year 1683. In the eyes of Osama bin Laden, it was the day the West took control of Islam, and by striking on this day, he hoped to take a step in Islam, winning the war for global power and influence. Prior intelligence. At the end of 1999, Khalid, aka Walid bin Attash, got in touch with him to arrange a meeting in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Hazmi, aka Abu Bara al-Yemeni, would also be there. The National Security Agency, NSA, intercepted a phone call in which Khalid mentioned the meeting and the name Nawaf and Hazmi. The NSA was concerned something might be going on, but did not take any further action. The Malaysian Special Branch monitored the meeting between Khalid and Hazmi on January 5, 2000. Khalid told the CIA that he and Hazmi were going to Bangkok. The CIA did not inform other agencies about the meeting, and did not request from the State Department that Hazmi be added to its list of Al-Qaeda suspects. After the meeting, an FBI liaison contacted Alex Station and asked permission to report the meeting to the FBI, but was told, this is not an FBI matter. By the end of June, Senior Counterterrorism Officer Richard Clark and CIA Director George Tenet were convinced that a large-scale series of attacks was imminent, although the CIA thought the attacks would take place in Saudi Arabia and Israel. At the beginning of July, Clark ordered domestic agencies on full alert, telling them that something spectacular is about to happen here and it's going to happen soon. He asked the FBI, State Department, embassies, police departments, and Defense Department to go into threat condition Delta. Somewhere in the CIA, Clark wrote, there were reports that 2 known Al-Qaeda terrorists had entered the United States, and somewhere in the FBI, reports that strange things were happening at flight schools all over the United States. They had specific information about individual terrorists, from which one could have inferred what was going to happen. None of this information reached Clark or the White House. On July 13, 2001, Tom Wilshire, an FBI special agent assigned to the FBI's International Terrorism Division, emailed his CIA superiors at the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, CTC, asking permission to notify the FBI of Hazmi's presence in the country and the fact that Midhar has a U.S. visa. The CIA did not respond. On July 14, 2001, FBI analyst Margaret Gillespie, an FBI analyst working within the CTC, was told to review the material relating to the Malaysia meeting, but was not informed that the participant was in the United States. The CIA provided Gillespie with surveillance photos of Hazmi from that meeting to present to FBI counterterrorism, but did not explain the significance of the photos to her. According to the Interlink database, she was not allowed to share intelligence material with criminal investigators at the meeting. When she showed the photos to the FBI refused to provide more information on their significance and did not provide her with Midhar's date of birth or a passport number. At the end of August 2001, Gillespie reported to INS, State Department, Customs Service, and FBI that has. At the end of July, an FBI agent based in Phoenix sent a note to FBI headquarters, Alex Station, and FBI agents, New York, warning them that Osama bin Laden may be attempting to send out a concerted effort to send out students to attend universities and colleges in the United States for civil aviation training. The agent Kenneth Williams recommended interviewing all flight school administrators and identifying all Arab students looking for flight training. In July, Jordan notified the United States of al-Qaeda's intention to attack the United States. A few months later, Jordan informed the United States that the attack was codenamed the Big Wedding and that it would involve aircraft. The following day, August 6, 2001, the CIA's Presidential Daily Brief, PDB, was entitled Bin Laden's Two Strike in U.S. The memo stated that FBI information points to a pattern of suspicious activity in this country that appears consistent with preparation for a hijacking or other type of attack. By mid-August, a Minnesota flight school had reported Zacharias to the FBI for asking suspicious questions. The FBI determined that he was a radical traveling to Pakistan. The INS arrested him for exceeding the terms of his French visa. The FBI had requested to search his laptop, but FBI headquarters refused because there was no probable cause. The lack of intelligence sharing was largely due to the 1995 Justice Department policies restricting intelligence sharing, as well as the CIA and NSA's reluctance to reveal sensitive sources and methods like tapped phones. In April 2004, Attorney General John Ashcroft said that the single greatest structural cause of the September 11th problem was the wall that separated criminal investigators from intelligence agents. In Clark's words, there was a failure to get information to the right people at the right time. Attacks. On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 hijackers hijacked 4 commercial airliners, 2 Boeing 757s and 2 Boeing 767s, on their way to California after taking off from Boston's Logan International Airport, Newark Liberty International Airport, New Jersey, and Dulles International Airport, Loudoun and Fairfax counties, Virginia. Large aircraft with long flights were chosen for hijackings because they had more fuel. According to Atta, hijacking a Boeing aircraft was based on his knowledge of the autopilot function. The 4 crashes. American Airlines Flight 11 left Boston's Logan International Airport at 7:59 in the morning. The hijackers took control of the plane 15 minutes later. At least 3 people were injured, and possibly killed, in the attack. The hijackers used box cutters to gain access to the cockpit before displaying an apparent explosive. They also sprayed mace in the cabin to scare the passengers into submission and impede resistance. United Airlines Flight 175 left Logan International Airport at approximately 8:14 in the morning, about the same time that Flight 11 was hijacked. A few hundred miles southwest of Logan, American Airlines Flight 77 took off at approximately 8:20 in the morning. Flight 175 continued its normal route for 28 minutes before it was hijacked at approximately 8:42 in the morning. A group of 5 hijackers killed both pilots and several crew members in the attack before taking control of the plane. The hijackers made use of bomb threats to scare passengers and crew into submission. They also sprayed chemical weapons in the cabin to disable any resistance. United Airlines Flight 93 took off from New Jersey's Newark International Airport at 8:46 in the morning. The plane was scheduled to depart at 8 o'clock but arrived 42 minutes later. The first plane to crash into the World Trade Center's WTC North Tower 1 was deliberately brought down at 8:51 in the morning. Many assumed it was an accident. American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked by a group of 5 who forced their way into the cockpit 31 minutes into the flight. The hijackers were armed with knives, but no one on board was reported to have been stabbed. The 2 people who made the phone call didn't mention using mace or making bomb threats. The second plane crashed into the South Towers, 2, South Facade, WTC, at 9:03 in the morning, just 17 minutes after the first. Flight 93 was hijacked by 4 men who killed at least 1 passenger after waiting 46 minutes to hijack the plane, a delay that proved fatal for the terrorists in combination with the delayed runway takeoff. The men stormed the cockpit and took control of Flight 93 at 9:28 in the morning, turning the aircraft eastbound and heading toward Washington, D.C. Similar to the first 2 hijackings, the fourth team used bomb threats as well as mace to fill the cabin. At 9:57 in the morning, Flight 77, also known as Flight 77, crashed into the western side of the Pentagon, 9 minutes after Flight 93's hijacking. Because of the delays, the passengers and crew on Flight 93 had plenty of time to learn about the previous attacks on the plane through phone calls to ground. In a matter of minutes, the passengers had organized a rebellion and were storming the cockpit door. The hijackers feared their captives would overpower them, so they rolled the plane over and began a nosedive, causing it to land in a field outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes southeast of Pittsburgh. It is believed that the plane was headed to Washington, D.C., and was headed toward either the Capitol building or the White House. Passengers and crew members on the ground called from the plane using cabin air phones and cell phones said that there were several hijackers on each plane, that the hijackers used mace or tear gas or pepper spray on attendants, and that some people on the plane were stabbed. The hijackers reportedly stabbed pilots and flight attendants, as well as 1 or several passengers. The 9/11 Commission's final report noted that the hijackers recently purchased multifunction hand tools and several Leatherman-type utility knives, with locking blades, but that none of these items were found among the hijackers' belongings. According to a Flight 11 flight attendant, a Flight 175 passenger, and a Flight 93 passenger, the hijackers claimed to have bombs, but one passenger said they thought they were fake. The FBI did not find any evidence of explosives at any of the crash sites. The 9/11 Commission concluded that the bombs were most likely fake. On at least 2 hijacked flights, American 11 and United 93, the hijackers claimed on the PA system they were taking hostages and were heading back to the airport to have a ransom demand fulfilled. This was clearly an attempt to stop passengers from resisting the hijackers. In both cases, the hijacker pilots, in this case, Mohammed Atta, and in this case, Zia-ul-Haq, Ziad Jarrah, mistakenly keyed the wrong switch, sending their messages to ATC instead of the people on the plane as intended, informing flight controllers that they had hijacked the planes. All 3 World Trade Center buildings collapsed on September 11, 2001. The South Tower was hit 17 minutes later, but the plane's impact zone was much lower, much faster. And it crashed into a corner. The plane's unevenly balanced additional structural weight caused the South Tower to collapse first. The North Tower burned 56 minutes in the fire that resulted from the crash and explosion of United Airlines Flight 175. It burned for an additional 29 minutes before it collapsed. American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower 1 hour and 43 minutes after it was hit. Debris from the collapse of the North Tower fell on the adjacent building, 7 WTC. The debris damaged the building and ignited fires that burned for nearly 7 hours. The fires compromised the building's structural integrity. 7 WTC collapsed at 15:21. The western side of the Pentagon was also severely damaged. On September 11, 2001, at 9:42 in the morning, the FAA grounded all civilian flights within the continental United States. All civilian aircraft that were in flight at the time of the attack were ordered to land immediately. All international civilian flights were either rerouted or diverted to airports in Canada and Mexico, and were prohibited from landing on U.S. soil for 3 days. The attacks caused widespread confusion among news agencies and airline pilots. Among the unconfirmed and often conflicting news stories aired throughout the day was one of the most popular, that a car bomb had gone off at the U.S. State Department's Washington headquarters. Another jet, Delta Airlines Flight 1989, was suspected of being hijacked, but the plane responded to air traffic controllers and landed in Cleveland, Ohio safely. According to an April 2002 interview with Al-Qaeda, the hijackers, known as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, said that Flight 93's intended target was the United States Capitol, not the White House. During the planning stages of the attacks, Al-Qaeda leader Mohammed Atta, the hijacker and Flight 11's pilot, believed the White House to be too tough a target and asked for an assessment from Al-Qaeda hijacker and Flight 77's hijacker, Al-Hassan Ali. According to Mohammed, Al-Qaeda initially wanted to target nuclear facilities instead of the World Trade Center, WTC, and the Pentagon, but decided against it because it was too dangerous and too risky. The pilots were responsible for making the final decisions on targets. If any pilot didn't make it to their intended destination, they were to crash the plane. Casualties. On September 11, 2001, the attack on the North Tower of the World Trade Center was carried out on its own, making 9/11 the most deadly act of terrorism in the history of the world. In total, the 4 crashes killed 2,996 people, including the hijackers, injured thousands more, and left 265 people dead on each of the 4 planes. No survivors, killed 2,606 people in and around the World Trade Center, and killed 125 people at the Pentagon. The majority of the victims were civilians, with 343 firemen, 72 police officers, 55 military, and 19 terrorists killed. New Jersey lost the highest number of state citizens after New York, with more than 90 countries losing citizens as a result of the attacks. In New York City, the majority of workers and visitors who lost their lives in the towers were at or above the point of impact, with 1,344 to 1,402 people in the North Tower being at, above, or 1 floor below, the point of impact. Hundreds of people were killed instantly at the moment the plane hit. Of the estimated 800 people who survived the impact are trapped and killed in the fires or by smoke inhalation, fell or jumped off the tower to get away from the flames and smoke, collapsed in the building's collapse. The destruction of all 3 staircases in the North Tower when Flight 11 hit meant that no one from the impact zone could escape up the tower's tower stairs. Only 107 survivors were not trapped by the damage caused by Flight 175's impact. Unlike the North Tower survivors, most of the estimated 300 survivors in the South Tower were either unaware that an escape route still existed or unable to use it. Like the North Tower, there were hundreds of people on the South Tower's 77th floor at the time of impact. The 92nd floor was rendered inescapable by Flight 11's impact when the plane smashed into floors 93 and 99. The debris from the impact blocked all the stairwells on the 92nd floor, resulting in the deaths of 69 workers on floors below the point where the plane crashed. Stairwell A was just inches away from being destroyed when Flight 175 hit the building, enabling 14 people on the floors where the plane crashed. Stanley Premnath was one of them, and 4 more on the floors above to get out. New York City 911 operators, who received calls from those inside the tower, were not fully aware of what was happening as it happened and advised callers not to attempt to descend the tower by themselves. The total number of fatalities in the South Tower was 630, less than half of the number in the North Tower. Of the 100 to 200 people who were seen jumping or falling that morning, only 3 were from the South Tower. Casualties in the South Tower were greatly reduced because some people chose to leave the building right after the first crash, and Eric Eisenberg, executive at AON Insurance, ordered the evacuation of floors 92 and 98 to 105 in the immediate aftermath of Flight 11. The 17-minute window allowed more than 900 of AON's 1,100 on-site employees to evacuate from their offices above 77th floor prior to the South Tower's impact. Eisenberg himself was one of nearly 200 who didn't make it out. Similar evacuations were conducted by firms such as Fiduciary Trust, CSC, and Euro Brokers, all of whose offices were above the South Tower. The lack of a full evacuation order for the South Tower following the first plane's crash into the North Tower was called one of the great tragedies of the day by USA Today. More than 200 people died as a result of the fire and smoke, and some of the tower's occupants made their way to the roof in hopes of a helicopter rescue, only to find it locked down due to roof equipment, smoke, and extreme heat. There was no plan for helicopter rescue, and there was no way for rescuers to get there. The World Trade Center complex lost 414 emergency workers as they tried to save people and fight fires. Another law enforcement officer died when United 93 crashed, and the New York City Fire Department lost 343 firemen, including 1 chaplain and 2 firemen. The New York City Police Department lost 23 officers, and the Port Authority Police Department lost 37 officers. 8 EMTs and paramedics from private EMTs units were killed. Nearly all of the emergency workers who died that day were killed when the towers collapsed, except for one who was killed when a civilian fell from the top of the South Tower's North Tower. The towers also killed 658 employees of Cantor Fitzgerald LP, the most of any employer. The investment bank was located on the North Tower's 101st to 105th floors, and it lost 358 employees. Another employer, U.S. Marsh Incorporated, on the 93rd to 100th floors of the North Tower, lost 175 employees. According to NIST, there were an estimated 17,400 civilians in the World Trade Center complex at the time. According to Port Authority turnstiles, there were 14,154 people in the Twin Towers at 8:45 in the morning. Most of the people in the impact zone were safely evacuated. At the Pentagon, 125 workers were killed when Flight 77 hit the building's west side. 71 of the victims were civilians, and the other 55 were military personnel. Many of them worked for the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy. The Army accounted for 47 civilian employees, 6 civilian contractors, and 22 soldiers. The Navy accounted for 6 civilian employees, 3 civilian contractors, and 33 sailors. The DIA accounted for 7 civilian employees and 1 ODS contractor. The highest civilian death at the Pentagon was that of a U.S. Army Deputy Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Timothy Maude. It was several weeks after the attack that the death toll rose to more than 6,000. The city was able to identify remains of only about 1,600 people. The medical examiner's office collected approximately 10,000 unidentified fragments of bone and tissue that cannot be added to the list of the deceased. In 2006, bone fragments were still found by workers preparing to tear down the destroyed Deutsche Bank building. In July 2010, an anthropologist and an archaeologist searched for human remains at Fresh Kills landfill and found 72 more human remains, bringing the total to 1,888. DNA profiling continues in an effort to identify more victims. The remains are stored in Memorial Park, which is outside of the NYC Medical Examiner's facilities. The remains were expected to be moved to a repository inside a wall at the NYC 9/11 Museum in 2013. In July 2011, a group of scientists at the Office of Chief Medical Examiner continued to work on identifying remains, hoping that advances in DNA technology would allow them to identify more victims in the future. One of the victims was identified in August 2017 as a result of the use of new DNA technology, and another was identified in July 2018. In October 2019, 3 more victims were identified. In September 2021, 2 more were identified, and in September 2023, another 2 were identified. 1,104 victims remained unidentified on September 2023, representing 40% of the victims of the World Trade Center attacks. On September 25, 2022, the FDNY announced that with the deaths of EMT Hildy Van Atta and retiree fireman Robert Fulco, the department had lost the equivalent number of firemen, EMTs, and civilian members to illnesses related to 9/11 as it had on September 11, 2001. Damage. In addition to the 110-story Twin Towers, several other buildings were destroyed or severely damaged, including World Trade Center, WTC buildings, 3, 2, 7, and the Greek Orthodox Church, St. Nicholas. The North Tower and South Tower, respectively, were destroyed, as were the Marriott hotels, 3 WTC, and 7 WTC. Other buildings were damaged, including the U.S. Customs House, 6 WTC, 4 WTC, and 5 World Trade Center. Both pedestrian bridges connecting the buildings were also severely damaged. On the other side of Liberty Street, the Deutsche Bank building, still commonly known as the Bankers Trust Building, at 130 Liberty Street, was partially damaged in the attack and demolished a few years later, beginning in 2007. Both World Financial Center buildings were also damaged in the attack. The final fires at the site were put out on December 20th, the 100th anniversary of the attacks, but the Deutsche Bank building was later declared uninhabitable due to toxic conditions within the office tower, and was demolished. Another building that was condemned was the Borough of Manhattan Community College's Fiderman Hall, 30 West Broadway, which reopened in 2012. Other nearby buildings, 90 West Street, the Verizon Building, sustained significant damage but have since been returned to their original condition. The World Financial Center buildings, 1 Liberty Plaza, 1 Millennium Hilton, and 90 Church Street sustained moderate damage but have since returned to their former glory. Communications equipment atop the North Tower was destroyed, with WCBS-TV retaining a backup transmitter atop the Empire State Building. However, media stations were able to quickly redirect the signals and begin broadcasting again. The World Trade Center station on the PATH train system was located beneath the complex. When the towers collapsed, the station was torn down, with the tunnels leading to the station in Jersey City, New Jersey, being flooded with water. The station was rebuilt into the $4 billion World Trade Center Transportation Hub, which opened in March 2015. Another nearby station, Cortlandt Street on New York City Subway's RT Broadway 7th Avenue line, was also torn down. The entire station and the surrounding track were reduced to rubble. The latter station was restored and opened to the public on September 8, 2018. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon on September 11, 2001, causing extensive damage. One section of the building collapsed. As the aircraft approached the building, its wings crashed into light poles, and its right engine crashed into a power generator before slamming into the building's west side. The plane crashed on the first floor of the building. The front section of the fuselage broke apart on impact, and debris continued to move for another split second. The tail section penetrated the building's outermost 5 rings, reaching 310 feet, 94 meters. Rescue efforts. The New York City Fire Department, FDNY, sent over 200 units, about half of the department's size, to World Trade Center. They were joined by off-duty firemen and emergency medical technicians, EMTs. The New York City Police, NYPD, dispatched its emergency service units, ESUs, and other police units, as well as deploying its aviation unit. The NYPD aviation unit evaluated the situation and determined that helicopter rescue from the towers was not possible. The Port Authority Police Departments, PAPD, numerous police officers also took part in rescue efforts. Once on scene, the fire department, police, and EMS did not coordinate their efforts and conducted multiple searches for civilians. As conditions worsened, the aviation unit of the New York Police Department, NYPD, transmitted information to police commanders who ordered personnel to begin evacuating the towers. Most of the New York City Police, NYPD, officers were able to evacuate before the towers came down. With separate command posts established and incompatible radio communication between the agencies, the warnings were not relayed to the FDNY Fire Department, FDNY Fire Department. FDNY Fire Department commanders issued evacuation warnings after the first tower came down, but many of the fire department's firemen didn't hear the evacuation orders because of technical issues with their radio repeater systems. 911 callers also received information that wasn't relayed to fire department commanders on the scene. Reactions. Immediate responses to the events of 9/11 included domestic reactions, closures and cancellations, hate crimes, Muslim American responses, international responses to the events, and military responses. Immediately after the attacks, the United States government established a fund called the September 11, 2001 Victim Compensation Fund. The goal of the fund is to provide compensation to the victims and their families in exchange for their consent not to sue the airline corporations involved in the attacks. The fund is authorized by legislation to distribute a maximum amount of $7,375 billion, including operating and administrative costs. The fund was originally set to expire in 2020 but was extended in 2019 to allow for claims to be filed through October 2090. Immediate response. Flight 11 was hijacked at 8:32 in the morning. FAA officials reported the hijacking to NORAD, which then reported it to the FAA. Two F-15s were scrambled from Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts at 8:53 in the morning. The FAA's communication was slow and confusing, giving NORAD 9 minutes notice of the hijacking and no notice of any other flights before the crash. By 9:30 in the morning, two more F-15s had been scrambled from the nearby Air Force Base at Langley, Virginia. Vice President Dick Cheney gave orders at 10:20 in the morning to shoot down commercial aircraft that were positively identified as hijacked. The instructions were not relayed to the fighters in time for action. Some fighters took off without live ammunition, because they knew that to stop the hijackers from hitting their targets, the pilots would have to intercept the hijacked planes and crash into them, with ejection at the last minute. The emergency preparedness plan known as SCATANA was activated for the first time in U.S. history, causing tens of thousands of stranded passengers around the world. On his first day as FAA National Operations Manager, Ben Sliney ordered American airspace to close to all international flights. About 500 flights were turned back or diverted to other countries, with Canada receiving 226 out of the diverted flights. The FAA also initiated Operation Yellow Ribbon to handle the large number of grounded aircraft and stranded passengers. The 9/11 attacks also had a direct impact on the American people, with police and rescue workers across the country taking leave from their jobs to help clean up debris from the collapsed Twin Towers and an increase in blood donations across the country in the weeks following the attacks. Domestic reactions. George W. Bush's approval rating rose to 90% in the wake of the attacks. In a televised address to the nation and Congress on September 20, 2001, Bush outlined his plan to respond to the attacks, as well as the rescue and recovery effort that followed. Mayor Rudy Giuliani's high-profile role in the aftermath of the attacks was widely praised in New York City and across the country. Immediate relief funds were set up to help the victims of the attacks, with the primary focus being on providing financial aid to survivors and victims' families. By September 11, 2003, there had been 2,833 claims for victims' compensation from families of those killed in the attacks. In the weeks following the attacks, contingency plans were put in place to ensure continuity of government, and leaders were evacuated. It wasn't until February 2002 that Congress was notified that the U.S. was in a state of continuity of government. In 2002, the United States passed the Homeland Security Act, which was the biggest restructuring of the United States government in modern history. The act also created the United States Department of Homeland Security, USDHS. In response to the Congress's USA Patriot Act, which was intended to help with the detection and prosecution of terrorism and other crimes, civil liberties groups objected to the act, claiming that it allowed law enforcement to violate citizens' privacy and that it removed judicial oversight over law enforcement activities and domestic intelligence activities. In order to fight future acts of terrorism more effectively, the NSA was given wide-ranging powers. NSA began warrantless wiretapping of telecommunications, which has been criticized as allowing the agency to listen in on telephone and electronic communications between the United States and persons overseas without a warrant, in response to requests from various intelligence agencies. The U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, USFISC, authorized an expansion of powers for the U.S. government in the collection, acquisition, and sharing of information on both U.S. and foreign nationals from around the world. Hate crimes. On September 11, President Bush visited Washington's largest Islamic center 6 days after the attacks and declared that America's millions of Muslims have made an incredibly valuable contribution to our nation, and called for respect for them. In the days that followed, there were numerous reports of anti-Muslim harassment and hate crimes targeting Muslims and South Asians. Muslims were also targeted because of their turbans, which are seen as a symbol of the Muslim faith. Attacks on mosques and religious buildings were reported, including the bombing of a Hindu temple, as well as assaults on individuals. One of the most high-profile attacks was the killing of a Sikh mistaken as a Muslim in Mesa, Arizona, September 15, 2001. 3 days later, 24 members of Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden's family were flown out of the United States on a private charter flight under FBI supervision. An academic study found that people who were perceived to be Middle Eastern were 3 times more likely to be targeted for hate crimes than those who were followers of Islam. The same study found a similar rise in hate crimes targeting people who were perceived as Muslims, Arabs, or other Middle Easterners. According to a report by South Asian American advocates, 645 bias incidents were documented in the media between September 11, 2001 and 2002. These incidents included vandalism, arson, assault, shooting, harassment and threats in numerous locations. Women wearing hijabs were targeted. Discrimination and racial profiling. A survey of Arab Americans in May 2002 found that 20% of respondents had experienced discrimination personally since September 11. Another survey of Muslim Americans in July 2002 found that 48% of respondents believed their lives had been adversely affected by the attacks, and 57% of respondents reported having experienced an act of discrimination or prejudice. After the attacks, Pakistani Americans changed their name to Indian in order to avoid discrimination and secure employment. Pakistan was created in 1947 as a result of partition of India. In May 2002, EEOC received 488 employment discrimination complaints, 301 of which were from fired workers. By June 2002, U.S. DOT was investigating 111 September 11 related complaints from airline passengers who said their religious or ethnic background caused them to be discriminated against at security checkpoints. DOT also investigated an additional 31 claims from passengers who said they were completely barred from getting on airplanes. Muslim American response. Muslim organizations in the U.S. quickly denounced the attacks and urged Muslim Americans to step forward with their talents and resources to help alleviate the suffering of the victims and their families. These organizations included the ISNA, the American Muslim Alliance, the American Muslim Council, the CARE, and the Sharia Tashriq Organization of North America. In addition to monetary contributions, many Islamic organizations started blood drives and offered medical care, food, and lodging to the victims. Interfaith efforts. After the attacks, there was a surge in interest in Islam. Many mosques and Islamic centers held open houses and held outreach programs to teach non-Muslims about Islam. In the first decade following the attacks, the number of interfaith community service organizations rose from 8% to 20%, and the percentage of American congregations participating in interfaith worship more than doubled from 7% to 14%. International reactions. Mass media and governments around the world denounced the attacks. Nations around the world expressed pro-American solidarity. Leaders in most of the Middle East, including Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, denounced the attacks. The only exception was in Iraq, where an official statement immediately denounced the attacks as the fruits of the American cowboys' crimes against humanity. Saudi Arabia's government denounced the attacks in public, but many Saudi Arabians supported bin Laden in private. Yasser Arafat, the president of the PA, also denounced the attacks. There were reports of large-scale celebrations in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Palestinian leaders discredited news broadcasts that supported the attacks, or showed celebrations. The PA said the celebrations did not reflect the sentiment of the Palestinians, and it would not let a few kids smear the true face of the Palestinians. According to CNN and other news outlets, a report originating from a Brazilian university said it was from 1991. However, this was later found to be false. Just as in the US, the attacks led to a rise in anti-Muslim violence in other countries. UNSC Resolution 1368 denounced the attacks and declared its readiness to take any necessary action to respond to and combat terrorism, in accordance with its charter. Countries passed anti-terrorism laws and blocked bank accounts suspected of having ties to Al-Qaeda. Police and intelligence agencies arrested suspected terrorists. Prime Minister Tony Blair declared Britain's unwavering support for the US, and a few days later flew to Washington to express Britain's solidarity with the US. 9 days after the attack, President Bush addressed Congress, where Blair was a guest, saying Britain has never had a truer friend. Following the attacks, Blair went on a 2-month diplomatic tour to drum up support for a military response, meeting with 54 world leaders and traveling more than 60,000 kilometers, 40,000 miles. The US established the detention camp at Guantanamo Bay to hold prisoners it classified as illegals. The EU and human rights groups questioned the legality of the detention. Khatami, Iran's 5th president, said that we fully understand the feeling of the Americans following the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. He added that the US administrations had been, at best, indifferent to terrorist activities in Iran, 1979, and that we empathize with the bereaved Americans in the tragic events of September 11. He also said that nations shouldn't be punished in the place of terrorists. According to the Radio Farda website, when news of the attacks broke, some Iranian citizens went to the US Embassy of Switzerland in Tehran, which is the US protecting power in Iran, to express their condolences, and some lit candles as a sign of condolence. In 2011, the US Department of State posted on its blog that it deeply appreciates the outpouring of sympathy from the Iranian people for the victims of the attacks, and that it will never forget the kindness of the Iranian people in these difficult times. The president and supreme leader of Iran denounced the attacks, and the BBC and Time magazine reported on candlelit vigils held for the victims on their websites. Politico magazine reported that Ali Khamenei temporarily suspended the usual "Death to America" chants at Friday prayers. On September 11, 2001, a few days after the attacks, AEK Athens fans tried to burn an Israeli flag and an American flag. Though the American flag did not catch fire, the fans booed during a moment of silence for victims of the attacks. Military operations. At 2:40 p.m. on September 11, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld ordered his aides to search for proof of Iraqi involvement. Rumsfeld's notes, taken by senior policy officer Stephen Cambone, show that Rumsfeld wanted best info fast and to see if they're good enough to hit Saddam Hussein at the same time, not just Osama bin Laden. According to Cambone's notes, Rumsfeld said, "We need to move fast, near-term target needs, go massive, sweep it all up, things related and not." The Bush administration rejected the possibility of attacking Iraq in a September 15 meeting at Camp David, citing Saddam Hussein's support of terrorism. At the time, 7 in 10 Americans believed that the Iraqi president had played some role in the September 11 attacks. 3 years later, Bush admitted that he had not. The NATO Council declared that the attacks on the US constituted an invasion of all NATO nations, in accordance with the provisions of Article 5 of the NATO Charter. This was the first time Article 5 had been invoked since the Cold War, when it was drafted in response to the Soviet Union's attack on NATO. Australia's Prime Minister, John Howard, was in Washington at the time of the attacks. The Bush administration declared a war on terrorism, vowing to bring bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda network to justice and to stop the growth of new terrorist networks by imposing economic sanctions on states harboring them, as well as stepping up global surveillance and sharing intelligence. The authorization for the use of military force against terrorists was passed by Congress on the 14th of September 2001, authorizing the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against those he deemed planetary, financial, administrative, chemical, radiological, biological, radiological, or naval persons, entities, or groups, or those who carried out, directed, or supported the attacks of September 11, 2001. The authorization remains in force to this day. The war in Afghanistan began on October 7, 2001 when United States and British forces launched airstrikes against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda camps, followed by a ground invasion of Afghanistan by special forces. The fall of Kandahar to the United States-led coalition forces in December 2001 marked the beginning of the end of the Taliban rule in Afghanistan. The Al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden, was targeted by United States coalition forces in the Battle of Tora Bora, but fled across the Pakistani border into the White Mountains, where he remained undetected for almost a decade. In an October 21, 2001 interview, bin Laden declared that the events had demonstrated the scale of the terrorism that the United States practiced around the world. He added that the world must be divided into two camps, Bush and his followers, and any nation that does not join the global crusade is associated with the terrorists. This new terrorism forced many governments to support it. The reality of America is that it puts Israel's interests above the interests of its own people. America will not live in safety until we live in safety in Palestine. America will not emerge from this crisis unless it leaves the Arabian Peninsula and stops supporting Israel. The Philippines and Indonesia, with their own internal conflicts against Islamic terrorism, have also stepped up their military preparedness. The US and the IRGC worked together to bring down the Taliban regime that had conflicts with Iran. The IRGC's Quds Force assisted US forces and Afghanistan's insurgents in the 2001 Herat rebellion. Aftermath. Health issues. After the collapse of the Twin Towers, hundreds of thousands of tons of toxic debris weighing in at over 2,500 tons of contaminants and carcinogens were scattered across Lower Manhattan. The toxins in this debris are believed to have caused fatalities and debilitating illnesses among those living near Ground Zero. The Bush administration instructed the EPA to issue statements about air quality after the attacks, citing national security. The EPA did not declare that air quality was back to normal until June 2002. The health effects of this toxic dust were felt by residents, students, and office workers throughout Lower Manhattan and Chinatown. Several deaths were attributed to this toxic dust, and the victims' names were added to the memorial at World Trade Center. It is estimated that approximately 18,000 individuals developed illnesses from this toxic dust. There is also scientific evidence that various toxic products present in the air can have adverse effects on fetal development. In April 2010, a study of rescue workers found that all of them had impaired lung function and that 30% to 40% of them reported little or no relief from persistent symptoms that began within the first year after the attacks. Years later, lawsuits over the cost of illnesses resulting from the attacks were still pending. A federal judge on October 17, 2006 ruled that New York City could not refuse to pay for the health costs of rescue workers, opening the door to numerous lawsuits against the city. Government officials were faulted for urging people to move back to Lower Manhattan during the weeks immediately following the attacks. Governor Christine Todd Whitman, D., administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in the aftermath of the attacks, was blasted by a federal judge for erroneously asserting that the area was environmentally safe. Mayor Giuliani was also faulted for urging financial industry workers to move back to Greater Wall Street in the wake of the attacks. The World Trade Center, WTC, health program was created with a budget of $4.2 billion to provide testing and treatment for individuals with long-term health issues related to the September 11 attacks. The program replaced pre-existing health programs related to 9/11, such as the Medical Monitoring and Treatment Program and the WTC Environmental Health Center program. The New York Police Department, NYPD, reported that in 2020, 247 NYPD police officers died from 9/11 related illnesses. The New York Fire Department, FDNY, reported that in September 2022, the total number of 9/11 related firefighter deaths reached 299. Both agencies anticipate an increase in the death toll over the next few years. The Port Authority, PAPD, which owns the World Trade Center site and has jurisdiction over police officers on the site, reported that 4 of its officers died in 2020. Joseph Morris, the PAP's chief at the time of the incident, ordered all PAPD officers to wear industrial respirators within 48 hours, and ordered the same 30 to 40 police officers to be deployed at the pile. This drastically reduced the total number of PAPD personnel exposed to the dust. The FDNY and New York Police Department had rotated hundreds, if not thousands, of personnel from across New York City into the pile. Many of them were exposed to dust that caused cancer or other illnesses years or even decades later. The PAPD did not provide adequate respirators or breathing equipment that would have prevented future illnesses. Economic. The economic fallout from the attacks reverberated across the US and global markets. The stock exchanges were closed on September 11th and remained shut until September 17th. The stock market reopened on September 11th with a record-breaking one-day drop of 684 points in the DJIA, Dow Jones Industrial Average, to 8,921. By the week's end, the index had dropped 1,369 points, or 14.3%, for its biggest one-week percentage decline in history. For $2001, U.S. stocks lost nearly $1 trillion in market value that week. The economic impact of the attacks on New York City was severe, with an estimated loss of 430,000 full-time equivalent jobs and $2.8 billion in wage losses in the 3 months following September 11th. The city's gross domestic product, GDP, declined by $7.3 billion over the 3-month period. The United States government responded to the attacks by providing $11,200,000 in emergency aid to the government of the state of New York in September 2001 and $10,500,000 in early 2002 to address the city's economic and infrastructure needs. Small businesses in the lower Manhattan vicinity were also hit hard, with 18,000 being destroyed or displaced, resulting in job losses and lost wages. Small Business Administration, SBA loans, federal government, CDG block grants, and economic injury disaster, EDL, loans were used to assist small businesses affected by the attacks. Office space in the lower Manhattan area was also damaged or destroyed, with some estimates ranging as high as $31.9 billion. Many wondered if these jobs would be restored and if the tax base would be able to recover. Studies of the economic impact of the 9/11 attacks show that Manhattan office real estate and office employment did not suffer as much as initially feared, likely due to the financial services sector's need for face-to-face interaction. The attacks also resulted in the closure of North American airspace for several days following the attacks, resulting in a near 20% cutback of air travel capacity and further exacerbating the financial problems of the struggling American airline industry. In addition to the United States' involvement in the war in Afghanistan and in the war in Iraq, the attacks led to an additional $5 trillion in homeland security spending. Effects in Afghanistan. At the time of the attacks, most of Afghanistan's population was already suffering from hunger. Tens of thousands of people tried to flee Afghanistan in the wake of the attacks, fearing that the United States would retaliate with military action. Pakistan, which had already taken in many Afghan refugees from earlier conflicts, closed its borders with Afghanistan on September 17, 2001. Thousands of Afghans also tried to flee to the border of Tajikistan, only to be denied entry. The leaders of the Taliban in Afghanistan begged the United States to not take military action, saying, "We ask you not to put Afghanistan in more suffering because our people have already suffered so much," referring to the 20 years of conflict and the resulting humanitarian crisis. All UN expatriates had gone home after the attacks, and none of the national and international aid workers were on the ground in Afghanistan. Instead, workers were preparing in bordering countries such as Pakistan, China, and Uzbekistan to avoid a potential humanitarian catastrophe in the face of a critical shortage of food for the entire population. On September 12, 2001, the World Food Programme announced that it would no longer be able to import wheat into Afghanistan. The Wall Street Journal suggested that a buffer zone could be established in the inevitable war, similar to what happened during the war in Bosnia. The United States led a large coalition of international forces against the Taliban regime in Afghanistan for harboring al-Qaeda. Pakistani authorities initially refused to join the coalition against the Taliban, but eventually allowed the coalition to access their military bases and arrested and transferred to the United States more than 600 al-Qaeda suspects. Aga Khan IV, a prominent Nizari Ismaili imam, said in a 2005 speech at the Nobel Institute that the 9/11 attacks on the United States were a direct result of the international community's failure to recognize the human tragedy that Afghanistan was facing at the time. In 2011, the United States and NATO began a military drawdown in Afghanistan under President Obama, which was completed in 2016. Under President Donald Trump and Vice President Joe Biden during the 2020 and 2021 presidencies, the United States along with its NATO allies pulled all of its troops from Afghanistan, completing the drawdown of all of its regular troops. The withdrawal from Afghanistan marked the conclusion of the war in Afghanistan that lasted from 2001 to 2021. Biden said that, after almost 2 decades of war, it is clear that the United States military has not been able to turn Afghanistan into a democracy. On July 31, 2022, al-Qaeda's second emir, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was killed by a U.S. drone strike at his residence in Kabul, Afghanistan. Cultural influence. The effects of 9/11 are not limited to geopolitics, but extend to society and culture as a whole. Immediate responses include a greater emphasis on family life and spending time with loved ones, increased church attendance, and heightened displays of patriotism, including the flying of U.S. flags. The radio industry has responded by removing some songs from playlists. The attacks have been used as a backdrop, narrative or thematic element in films, music, literature, and humor. TV shows and programs that have aired since 9/11 reflect post-9/11 cultural anxieties. Conspiracy theories about 9/11 have become a popular pastime, despite the lack of support from experts in science, engineering, and history. The events of 9/11 have also had a significant impact on the religious beliefs of many people. For some, it has strengthened their faith, helping them to cope with their grief and overcome their grief. For others, it has caused them to question their faith, or to lose it altogether. In the wake of the attacks, the culture of America has been characterized by heightened security and a heightened demand for it. It has also been characterized by paranoia and anxiety about future terrorist attacks on most of the country. Psychologists have confirmed that there has also been an increase in national anxiety about commercial air travel. Since the attacks, anti-Muslim hate crimes have risen nearly tenfold since 2001 and are still about 5 times higher than before the attacks. Government policies towards terrorism. In Germany, where several 9/11 terrorists resided and took advantage of the country's liberal asylum policies, the government passed 2 large anti-terrorism packages. The first package closed legal loopholes that allowed terrorists to live in Germany and raise money in the country. The second package focused on intelligence and law enforcement effectiveness and communication. In Canada, the government passed its first anti-terrorism bill. In the United Kingdom, the Anti-Terrorism, Crime and Security Law was passed in 2001. In New Zealand, the Terrorism Suppression Law was passed in 2002. In the U.S., the DHS was established by the USA Patriot Act of 2002 in order to coordinate domestic anti-terrorism efforts. The Patriot Act empowered the federal government to detain foreign terrorism suspects without charge for a week, monitor terrorism suspects' telephone communications, electronic mail, and internet use, and prosecute terrorism suspects without time limitations. Require airplanes' cockpits to be reinforced to keep terrorists out of control of planes, and place sky marshals on flights. Require the federal government to provide airport security, rather than the airport itself, and create a Transportation Security Administration, TSA, to inspect passengers and luggage, resulting in long delays and concerns about passenger privacy. In June 2013, following the publication of articles about the NSA's practice of collecting American call records, the PRISM program, and the disclosure of global surveillance, criticism has focused on the war's morality, effectiveness, and expense. A 2021 Watson Institute study found that the several wars in which the United States participated in the post-September 11 War on Terror resulted in 38 million people being displaced, conservatively speaking. The study estimated that these wars resulted in the deaths of between 897,001 and 929,999 people and cost the United States an estimated $8 trillion. The United States Constitution and federal criminal law prohibit the use of enhanced interrogation. In 2005, The Washington Post and human rights group HRW published reports on CIA flights and black sites, secret prisons run by the CIA and CIA-affiliated agencies. Some critics have referred to the use of CIA black sites to transfer suspected terrorists to countries known to use torture. Legal proceedings. All 19 hijackers were killed, but no charges were brought against them. Bin Laden was never charged with a crime, but after a decade-long manhunt, he was killed by U.S. Special Forces on May 2, 2011 at his compound in Pakistan's Abbottabad. The main trials of Muhammad and his accomplices Walid bin Attash, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Ammar al-Baluchi, and Mustafa Ahmed al-Hawsawi are still pending. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was first arrested on March 1, 2003 by Pakistani security officers working with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. He was held in several CIA secret prisons before being transferred to Guantanamo Bay, where he was repeatedly questioned and subjected to waterboarding techniques. In 2003, 2 other hijackers were arrested and brought to the U.S. Both of them would later be charged with aiding and abetting the hijackers by providing them with money and travel aid. In March 2007, at a hearing at Guantanamo Bay, Mohammed again asserted that he was solely responsible for the attacks on September 11, saying that 9/11 is what it sounds like, and that he was from A to Z, and that I was. The U.S. government reopened negotiations in January 2023, but Biden gave up on the talks in September 2023. So far, only a handful of people have been convicted on charges related to the attacks. Zawahiri was convicted in December 2001 by a federal jury in New York and sentenced to life without parole. Monir al-Motassadegh was convicted by a federal court in Germany in February 2003 and was released in October 2018. Abdulrahman el-Dada was arrested in Spain in November 2001 and sentenced by a Spanish high court in May 2013. Investigations. FBI. As soon as the attacks occurred, the FBI launched PNTT Bomb, the biggest criminal investigation in U.S. history. By the time the attacks were over half of all FBI agents were working on the investigation, following 500,000 leads, and the FBI said there was clear and unambiguous evidence that connected the hijackers and Bin Laden. When the hijackers' luggage was found at Boston's Logan Airport, it contained the names, assignments, and connections of the hijackers. It had all the Arab language papers that were the Rosetta Stone of the investigation, one FBI agent said. Within hours, the names and, in many cases, personal information of the hijackers and suspected pilots were made public. 2 of Atta's 3 bags had to be checked out at Logan Airport because space limitations on a 19-seater commuter flight he had taken to Boston. The luggage didn't make it onto American Airlines flight. On September 17, 2001, Abu Jandal, who had served as Bin Laden's chief bodyguard for several years, confirmed the identities of 7 of the hijackers as members of Al-Qaeda during interviews with the FBI. He had been imprisoned in a Yemeni jail since 2000. By midday on September 20, 2001, the United States National Security Agency, NSA, and German intelligence agencies, GSA, had both intercepted communications pointing to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. All 19 hijackers were photographed on September 27, 2001. The photos were accompanied by information about potential nationalities and aliases of the hijackers. 15 of them were Saudi Arabian nationals, 2 were United Arab Emirates citizens, 1 were Egyptian citizens, and 1 was a citizen of Lebanon. 2 of the hijackers had traveled with Bin Laden associates to Malaysia in 2000. One of the hijackers, Mohammed Atta, had previously traveled to Afghanistan. He and others were members of a terrorist cell based in Hamburg. One of the Hamburg cell members was identified as Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, an al-Qaeda member. Authorities in the US and UK also obtained electronic recordings, including phone calls and bank transfers, that showed Mohammed Atef was a key player in the 9/11 planning. The FBI also obtained telephone conversations that took place several days before September 11, 2001, between bin Laden and a Pakistani associate. In one of the calls, the two discussed an incident that will occur in America on or around September 11th and the potential consequences of the attack. In another call, bin Laden spoke to an associate in Afghanistan about the scale and effects of a planned operation. The conversations did not mention the location of the World Trade Center or the Pentagon or any other details. The FBI recorded the deaths in the attacks as murder in separate tables in its annual crime index for 2001. The FBI disclaimer stated that the number of deaths was so large that combining it with traditional crime statistics would create an outlier that would distort all types of measurements used in the program. New York City also did not include the deaths in their annual crime statistics for 2001. CIA. In 2004, CIA Inspector General Helgerson conducted an internal audit of the agency's performance before September 11th. Helgerson was highly critical of CIA leadership for failing to do everything in their power to fight terrorism. Helgerson wrote in the American Conservative that the CIA failed to prevent two of the hijackers from entering the United States and failed to share information about them with the FBI. Helgerson's report was made public in May 2007 by Senator Ron Wyden, a Democrat, who said, "The American people deserve to know what the CIA was doing in those crucial months leading up to 9/11. President Barack Obama released the report in 2009. Congressional inquiry. The FBI and CIA failed to use information, including information about terrorists known to the CIA, to disrupt these plots. The joint inquiry was formed in February 2002 by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The joint report was 832 pages long. The Bush administration asked for 28 related pages to remain classified. The chairman of the inquiry, Bob Graham, said in an interview in December 2002 that there was evidence that foreign governments were involved in aiding the activities of at least some of the terrorists within the United States. September 11th victims' families, members of Congress, and the Saudi government continue to push for the documents to be released. The families of the September 11th victims were frustrated by unanswered questions and redactions in the congressional inquiry, and asked for an independent commission to be appointed. The CIA chief, John Brennan, said in June 2016 that he expects 28 redacted pages from a congressional investigation into 9/11 to be released soon and that they will show that the Saudi government was not involved in the attacks. In September 2016, Congress approved a bill that would allow families of victims to sue Saudi Arabia over its alleged involvement in the attacks. 9/11 Commission. The 9/11 Commission was created in late 2002 by the U.S. House of Representatives under the auspices of Thomas Keane, the New Jersey governor from 1982 to 1990. The 9/11 Commission's mission was to provide a comprehensive account of the circumstances leading up to the attacks, including the preparedness for and immediate response to them. The report, which was 585 pages long, concluded that al-Qaeda was responsible for the attacks and that security and intelligence agencies had not been properly coordinated to prevent them. The 9/11 Commission report was released on July 22, 2004, and was 585 pages long. It outlined the events that led up to the attacks on September 11, 2001, and concluded that al-Qaeda was responsible. The report also looked at the lack of coordination among security and intelligence authorities in preventing the attacks. The report concluded that the attacks showed 4 types of failures: imagination, policy, capabilities, and management. The report also included numerous recommendations for preventing future attacks. By 2011, many of these recommendations had not yet been implemented. National Institute of Standards and Technology. The United States National Institute of Standardization, NIST, conducted investigations into the collapses of the Twin Towers and 7WTC. These investigations focused on why the buildings collapsed, what fire protection measures had been in place, and how fire protection systems could be improved for future construction. The investigation into the collapses of 1 and 2 WTC was completed in October 2005 and 7 was finished in August 2008, respectively. According to NIST, the fireproofing of the Twin Towers' steel infrastructure was blown away by the first impact of the planes, and that if this had not happened, the towers would likely have remained in place. A 2007 study of the collapse of the North Tower, published by Purdue University researchers, concluded that because the plane's impact had removed most of the structure's thermal insulation, the resulting heat from a normal office fire would have been sufficient to soften and weaken the exposed beams and columns enough to cause the collapse, regardless of how many columns were cut or damaged. According to the director of the initial investigation, the towers performed exceptionally well. The terrorist aircraft did not destroy the towers, the fire did. It was demonstrated that you could remove 2/3 of a tower's columns and a building would still remain standing. The fires damaged the trusses that supported the floors, causing them to sag. Sagging floors pulled on exterior steel columns, causing them to bow inward. With the core columns damaged, the buckled exterior columns were no longer able to support the buildings, leading them to collapse. The report also found that the tower's stairwells were inadequately reinforced to allow adequate emergency escape for those above impact zones. According to NIST, uncontrolled fires in the 7WTC building caused floor beams and girders to heat, resulting in the failure of a critical support column that initiated a fire-induced gradual collapse that brought down the building. Alleged Saudi government role. In July 2016, File 17 was released by the Obama administration, which is a compilation of names of 36 individuals, including suspected Saudi intelligence officers, attached to Saudi Arabia's embassy in Washington, D.C., connecting Saudi Arabia with the hijackers. In September 2016, Congress approved the JASTA Act, which had the practical effect of allowing the continuation of a long-standing civil lawsuit brought against Saudi Arabia by families of those who lost loved ones in the September 11 attacks for their government's alleged involvement in the attacks. In March 2018, a federal judge in New York granted a motion to proceed against the Saudi government of the 9/11 survivors and victims' families. In 2022, families of several 9/11 victims recovered a video and a notepad that the British court seized from a Saudi national. The first video shows al-Bayoumi hosting a gathering in San Diego for 2 of the hijackers, who arrived in the United States on the day of the attack. The second video shows him greeting an al-Qaeda cleric named Anwar al-Awlaki. He was accused of radicalizing Americans and was killed by a CIA drone strike in 2011. The notepad shows a handwritten airplane with some mathematical equations that a pilot's court statement suggests could have been used to plot the plane's rate of descent to reach a target. From the late 1990s to the day of the September 11, 2001, the FBI said in a 2017 memo, Omar al-Bayoumi served as a paid collaborator of the Saudi General Intelligence Presidency. As of April 2022, it is believed that he is living in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia denies any involvement in the 9/11 attacks. Rebuilding and memorials. On September 11, 2001, New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani declared, "We will recover. We will be stronger than ever, stronger politically, stronger economically, and our skyline will be restored." A massive search and rescue effort began within hours of the attacks and was completed by the following day. Months later, the World Trade Center site was cleared of debris by May 2002. A year after the attacks, a portion of the destroyed Pentagon site was rebuilt and opened to the public in late 2003. In 2006, the construction of a new World Trade Center, WTC, was completed. Work on the main WTC site was put on hold until 2006, when Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder, reached an agreement with the Port Authority, PTJ, on financing for the construction of One World Trade Center. Construction of the new WTC began on March 27, 2006 and was completed by April 27, 2013. On April 20, 2013, the spire was placed atop the building, making it the highest building in the hemisphere and officially the tallest in the world. The first tower to open on the site, 1WTC, was completed in 2014. The second tower, 4WTC, opened in 2013. It was the second tower opened on the site after the seventh tower, 7 World Trade Center. The third tower, 3WTC, opened in June 2022. The fourth skyscraper on the site, 5 World Trade Center, was completed in 2023, with construction beginning in 2024 and expected to be completed in 2029. In December 2022, New York City's National Cathedral opened for regular services for the first time since the attacks. The following year, New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art opened its doors to the public. In September 2023, New York City Mayor Rudolph W. Giuliani appointed Christopher O. Ward as the Port Authority's executive director, serving from 2008 to 2011, and Ward is widely credited with restarting construction on the site. Memorials. In the days that followed the attacks, vigils and memorials were held worldwide, and pictures of the victims were posted all over Ground Zero. One witness said that she could not take her eyes off the faces of the innocent victims who had been killed. They were everywhere, on the phone booths, on the street lights, on the subway station walls. It was like a huge funeral. People were quiet, sad, but very nice. I used to feel cold in New York, but now people were helping each other. President Bush declared September 11, 2001, Friday, as Patriot Day. The first memorial to be erected on the site of the attacks was the Tribute in Light, an 88-light installation at the foot of one of the towers. In August 2006, the New York City Department of Buildings held a memorial competition to find the best design for the memorial. The winning entry was the Reflecting Absence, a 2-floored reflecting pool in the footprint of the towers with a list of victims' names inside. The memorial was completed in 2011 and a museum was opened on September 21, 2014. Fritz Koenig's Sphere is the world's largest bronze sculpture of the 21st century. It stands between the Twin Towers on the Austin J. Tobin Plaza of New York City's World Trade Center, WTC, from 1971 until the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks. Weighing over 20 tons, the sphere was the only surviving piece of art to be largely intact from the rubble of the Twin Towers. Since the attacks, the sculpture, known as the Sphere in the United States, has become a major symbol of the commemoration of 9/11. After being dismantled and stored in a hangar at New York's John F. Kennedy, JFK, International Airport, NYC, the sphere was the subject of a 2001 documentary titled The Sphere by director Percy Adlon. The sculpture was brought back to Liberty Park on August 16, 2017. The 7-year anniversary of the attacks marked the completion of the Arlington County's Pentagon Memorial on September 10, 2008. The memorial consists of a grassy park with 184 benches that face the Pentagon. A private chapel and an indoor memorial were added during the 2001 to 2002 repairs, located at the crash site of Flight 77. A concrete and glass visitor center in Shanksville opened September 10, 2015. It sits atop a hill above the crash site and overlooks the white marble wall of names. The visitor center's observation platform is aligned with the white marble wall beneath Flight 93's path. A temporary memorial stands 500 yards, 457 meters, from the site of the crash. On August 25, 2008, New York City firemen donated a steel cross made of the World Trade Center's footprint and mounted it atop a platform that looks like the Pentagon. The cross was placed outside the firehouse. Other permanent memorials exist elsewhere. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships and funds have been raised by the families of the victims, as well as by numerous other organizations and private individuals. On each anniversary in New York, the names of those who lost their lives are read out over a backdrop of mournful music. At the Pentagon, the president attends a memorial service and requests Americans to observe a moment of silence on Patriot Day. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the First Lady typically attends a smaller service. In September 2023, U.S. President Joe Biden, the first sitting U.S. president to mark the day, did not attend a memorial service in the affected areas. Instead, he attended a memorial service in Anchorage, Alaska. Thank you for taking the time to engage with our content. We're delighted you enjoyed this article and would love to hear your feedback. Your feedback is really valuable to us, so please share it in the comments box below. Thank you for taking the time to engage with our content. We're delighted you enjoyed this article and would love to hear your feedback. Your feedback is really valuable to us, so please share it in the comments box below. If you're new and want to remain up to date on our latest material, subscribe to the Up First Time channel. By subscribing, you will be the first to learn about our new stories and videos, ensuring that you never miss out on any of the excitement. But we're more than just distributing material, we're also about creating a community. That is why we value your feedback so highly. If you have any recommendations or themes you'd like us to look into more, please leave them in the comments. We're always looking for new ideas and eager to hear from our viewers. And, speaking of ideas, if you're as enthusiastic about this subject or person as we are, have you considered doing a whole documentary? Your unique thoughts and viewpoints could be extremely beneficial to others, and presenting them in a documentary style could help you reach an even larger audience. This is something to think about. Finally, remember to click the like button and share this video with your friends and family. Let's work together to expand our community and welcome new members to the Up First Time family. Your support is invaluable to us, and we could not do it without you. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to continuing this great journey with you.